It was 7:42 p.m. on a Sunday in Pasadena when my father shredded my wedding invitation into ribbons. Right there at the dinner table, in front of 14 relatives. The rip of the paper was so sharp it felt like it split the air in two. My mother didn't blink as she leaned back in her chair and hissed one word, "Stain." Across the table, my sister Lauren, 29, and polished like a magazine cover, smirked as if she'd been waiting her whole life for this scene to play out. My name is Maddie Carter. I'm 28 years old, and until that night, I thought I understood humiliation. I was wrong. I bent down to pick up the fragments, my hands trembling as I tried to piece them together. The cursive script I'd spent hours choosing was now scattered like broken glass. Each jagged scrap mocked me. Proof that no matter how carefully I prepared, I'd never be enough for them. Lauren's smirk was the same one she wore the day she got the college fund I was denied, the new car I never got, the praise I never heard. When she made honor roll, there were balloons and dinners. When I did, it was treated like background noise. When she got engaged to a surgeon, champagne corks flew. When I announced my engagement to Evan, all I got was silence so heavy it burned. They never asked who he really was. Never cared to know the man who held me up when they tore me down. To them, Evan was just a guy with scuffed sneakers and an old Honda, someone unworthy of their daughter, their table, their name. They didn't see the fire behind his quiet eyes, or the strength in his patience. They only saw what they wanted to sneer at. Kneeling on the hardwood floor, I remembered birthdays, where Lauren's presents towered like skyscrapers, while mine fit into a single envelope. Family vacations I learned about from postcards. The graduation where she took the spotlight, and I wasn't even mentioned. Every holiday, every milestone, I was the shadow, and she was the glow. Around me, relatives whispered like a chorus of vultures. Aunt Margaret clucked her tongue, shaking her head as if my existence embarrassed her personally. Uncle Paul muttered that marrying Evan was a mistake I'd regret. Cousin Sarah actually laughed, the sound sharp as glass. Their words blurred together until they became the same old hymn. Maddie is not enough. Maddie is a disgrace. But when I stood up, clutching the shredded paper against my chest, something shifted. Shame didn't crush me the way it usually did. Instead, anger coiled in my stomach like a spring pulled too tight. It tasted bitter, yes, but it also tasted like resolve. Lauren leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine like a victor savoring her prize. I knew she had whispered something to Dad before dinner, a seed of venom planted to ensure this very outcome. The cruelty was too polished to be spontaneous. She wanted me small, broken, erased. That's when Evan's phone buzzed. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway. His voice, low at first, unfamiliar in its authority. I caught fragments, numbers, deadlines, things that didn't fit the man they all thought was a failure. Then, clear as day, I heard 5 words that made my breath catch. "Mr. Brooks, the board is waiting. Share your city below. Let's see how far one story of defiance can travel. Subscribe if you've ever been underestimated," because what came next was the moment I realized my family's worship of Lauren wasn't just favoritism. It might have been fraud. A week after the dinner in Pasadena, I was scrolling through my phone late at night, still replaying the sound of paper tearing, when the notifications hit. Photo after photo, post after post. My parents had thrown Lauren a birthday party that looked like something out of a celebrity magazine. She was turning 29, and the entire backyard had been transformed into a glowing palace. Strings of lights stretched across the lawn. A champagne tower sparkled in the center, and the guest list looked longer than most weddings I've worked. My mother had captioned one photo, "Our pride and joy." My father added, "The daughter who makes us proud every day." I scrolled through the images like I was scrolling through a world I would never belong to. Lauren stood in a designer gown I knew cost more than my yearly rent. The bracelets on her wrist gleamed like endorsements. Around her, relatives toasted, clapping as though she had single-handedly cured cancer. And then came the detail that stuck in my throat like a shard of glass. Lauren's foundation logo displayed across the banners, her so-called nonprofit that was supposed to fund scholarships and community programs. I stared at the photos longer than I should have. The gowns, the catering, the luxury decor. None of it matched the budget of a foundation dedicated to helping underprivileged kids. For the first time, the cracks in her halo became impossible to ignore. Was she really funding all this with her own money? Or was the charity just her personal ATM? I didn't say a word to Evan at first. I didn't want to sound bitter, like the jealous little sister, but he noticed me scrolling, my jaw tight, my thumb frozen over Lauren's smiling face. "What?" he asked softly. I shoved the phone toward him. He studied the photos, his brow furrowed, but his voice stayed calm. "She wants the spotlight," he said. "Let her have it. We'll build our own." I expected him to mean quietly, privately. But then he added something I never saw coming. "What if we live stream the wedding? Not for them, for scholarships. For art students who can't afford tuition. Every dollar raised goes straight to the kids." I blinked, caught between disbelief and awe. A live stream wasn't just a wedding. It was a broadcast, a chance to rewrite the narrative. Lauren had her glittering backyard gala. We would have something bigger, something untouchable. For the first time in weeks, I felt the burn of humiliation soften, replaced by a pulse of possibility. That night, I fell asleep with my phone on the nightstand. Lauren's party photos still glowing on the screen. But when morning came, there was something else waiting. I stumbled into the kitchen, half awake, and noticed an envelope slid under the door. No return address, no handwriting I recognized, just thick, cheap paper that felt wrong in my hands. I tore it open and froze. Inside was a wedding invitation. Not mine. The font was garish, the details twisted. My name and Evan's were printed at the top, but the venue listed was a rundown banquet hall in El Monte, the kind of place used for bingo nights and budget quinceañeras. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at the fake invitation, my hands shaking. It was clear. Someone wanted to turn my wedding into a punchline. The fake invitation from El Monte was still sitting on my counter when my phone buzzed with another blow. It was Claire, my best friend since college, the person who knew every version of me, from all-night study sessions to heartbreaks to the nervous laughter the night Evan first kissed me. Her voice on the line was colder than I'd ever heard it. "I can't come to your wedding, Maddie," she said flatly. I waited for a reason. Work, money, family obligations, anything that made sense. Instead, she delivered the knife straight to the bone. "Your parents are right. Marrying Evan will drag you down. It's embarrassing." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. This was Claire, the woman who'd once held my hand through a panic attack, the friend who'd promised she'd stand beside me in every milestone. I wanted to argue, to demand an explanation, but the line went silent after her words, like she'd already moved on. Then the call ended. I sat on the floor, clutching my phone, feeling like the foundation of my life was cracking beneath me. If my own best friend believed the lies, what chance did I have against the rest of the world? 2 days later, the truth began to leak. An anonymous email landed in my inbox. No sender name, just a subject line. "Thought you should see this." Against my better judgment, I clicked. Attached was an invoice, neatly itemized, billing $12,800 from Lauren's foundation to Claire. The description made my stomach twist. Consulting, reputation management. I scrolled through the PDF, my vision blurring. Lauren hadn't just bought loyalty. She had bought betrayal. Claire hadn't walked away because she doubted Evan. She had been paid to spread poison, to whisper doubts into the ears of anyone who might still stand by me. I wanted to throw up. My friendship, my trust, reduced to a line item in my sister's budget. For years, I had believed Lauren's cruelty stopped at me, that she only needed to dim my light, to keep her own shining. But this was warfare. She was buying soldiers to fight her battle, and Claire, my Claire, had signed the contract. I forwarded the email to Evan without a word. He read it in silence, then simply said, "This isn't your shame, Maddie. It's theirs." But shame had a way of finding me anyway. Within hours, the whispers grew louder. Screenshots spread in family group chats. Relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly had opinions. The cruelest came late that night, when my cousin posted a status on Facebook for everyone to see. Guess it's true. Evan Brooks is bankrupt. The words hung there, on the glowing screen, shared and reshared, mutating into gossip that spread faster than I could keep up with. And, for the first time, I began to wonder if this storm was bigger than anything I could survive. The rumor that Evan was broke spread like wildfire, and it couldn't have come at a worse time. That morning, I was signing a contract for live music at the wedding, a jazz ensemble that cost $38,500. The ink had barely dried when my phone lit up with another notification. A relative had posted a smirking comment under a shared article. "Hope she prepaid, because he can't." I wanted to slam the laptop shut, to throw the contract in the trash, to give them the satisfaction of believing they'd won. But something inside me stopped, a voice that said, "Wait." That night, I got my answer. I walked down the hall toward the living room, a glass of water in my hand, when I heard Evan's voice. Only it wasn't the calm, patient tone I knew. This was sharper, commanding. I paused at the doorway. His laptop screen glowed, showing a grid of suited executives. They weren't chatting. They were taking notes. Evan leaned forward, his voice like steel. "Push the Valencia acquisition across the line by Friday. I want no excuses." The room on the other side erupted in nods, hurried agreements, men and women scrambling to keep up. On the corner of the screen, the name read, "Mr. Brooks." I stood frozen, listening. The man in worn sneakers, the one my family mocked as a freeloader, was commanding a boardroom like a general leading an army. When the call ended, Evan closed the laptop and looked up. His expression softened instantly when he saw me. I didn't even sit down before blurting out, "Who are you, really?" He hesitated, rubbing his jaw. For the first time since I'd met him, Evan looked uncertain. Then he crossed the room, took my hand, and said quietly, "I'm the CEO of Brooks Nexus. It's a privately held tech company. Forbes listed me in their top 50 under 40. But I needed to know if you loved me for me, not for this." The words hit like thunder. All those nights my parents had sneered about him being unemployed. All those whispers about his debts. All lies. He wasn't struggling. He was protecting himself, protecting us. I should have felt betrayed, but I didn't. I felt seen. He had chosen me before showing me his empire. That mattered more than any title, any dollar. Then he dropped another surprise. "There's someone I want to bring in for the wedding broadcast. Not just a guest, a speaker, a friend of mine, an actress. She's been raising money for STEM scholarships for young women. She's agreed to join us, to make the live stream about more than us, to make it about opportunity." I stared at him, stunned. My family was busy fabricating banquet hall invitations to humiliate me, while Evan was planning to turn our wedding into a platform that could change lives. For the first time, I felt something powerful stirring inside me. Not just defiance, but purpose. That's when my phone buzzed again. It was the producer we'd been speaking with. His message, short and direct. Network wants to air it live. Saturday, 8:30 p.m. But they'll need release images of the Carter family. My breath caught. The one condition I dreaded most. Putting the people who despised me at the center of the biggest night of my life. It started with whispers, then screenshots, then the unmistakable proof that my family had gone further than I ever imagined. On Friday morning, I got a text from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Attached was a picture of what looked like my wedding invitation, except it wasn't. The card was cheap, the font was garish, and the venue listed wasn't Malibu, but a rundown banquet hall in El Monte that people usually rented out for budget birthday parties or bingo nights. Beneath the photo, my cousin had typed, "Couldn't even afford a church? Guess your parents were right." By noon, more messages flooded in. Apparently, my parents had printed and mailed 120 of these counterfeit invitations to relatives, neighbors, even distant acquaintances. The entire family tree now believed my real wedding was happening in a building with flickering fluorescent lights and folding chairs. The comments online were merciless. So sad she settled for a freeloader. What a downgrade compared to Lauren's gala. One aunt went as far as to post a Bible verse about choosing wisely who you marry, followed by a string of pitying emojis. Each notification felt like a knife twist, a calculated humiliation orchestrated to turn my happiest moment into a public joke. Lauren didn't need to confirm the ruse. She performed it. The very next day, she posted a photo from brunch, her wrist angled just so, showing off a brand new Cartier watch. The caption read, "Hard work pays off." Some of us know the difference between banquet halls and ballrooms. I stared at my phone until my vision blurred, my pulse hammering in my ears. The timing was too sharp, too perfect. While fake invitations made the rounds, Lauren was flaunting a watch that cost more than Evan's entire Honda Civic. Every pixel of that photo screamed one message. I win. She loses. But fate has a way of delivering surprises when you least expect them. That evening, Evan's parents came by. They didn't announce themselves with judgment or smugness. They arrived quietly, carrying a bouquet of lilies and a casserole dish, as though they knew I needed comfort more than words. We sat in the living room, the soft hum of the kettle filling the silence. Evan's mother reached into her handbag and placed a small silver USB drive on the coffee table. Her hand lingered there for a moment, as if she understood the weight of what she was handing me. "This came to us anonymously," she said, "from someone who claimed to be a former accountant for the foundation. They said you should see it, that it was too risky to send directly to you." My throat tightened. I picked it up with trembling fingers, slid it into my laptop, and watched the screen bloom with folders. Dozens of them, each labeled with dates, transactions, expense reports. At first, the numbers didn't make sense until they did. Tens of thousands of dollars, earmarked for scholarships and community programs, had been siphoned into luxury purchases, boutique shopping sprees, 5-star resort stays, airline tickets, designer handbags, and then the line that made my blood run cold. $12,800, consulting fee. Claire H. I froze. Claire, my best friend, the woman who had called me days earlier to tell me she wouldn't stand by my wedding because Evan would drag me down. The woman who had been my shoulder through every heartbreak, every setback, paid off by my sister's foundation like some pawn on a chessboard. The betrayal burned all over again, but this time it wasn't just emotional. It was documented. Receipts, spreadsheets, dates, numbers that painted a picture more damning than words ever could. Evan's father spoke quietly from across the room. "This isn't about you, Maddie. This is about them. People who know they're standing on a house of cards will do anything to keep it from collapsing." I wanted to scream, to throw the laptop across the room, but I didn't, I sat there staring at the evidence until my tears blurred the screen. They hadn't just humiliated me. They had corrupted something sacred. Lauren's foundation wasn't about charity or goodwill. It was a slush fund, a crown she wore in public while feeding herself in private. And now, I had the proof. As if the universe wanted to underscore the moment, my phone buzzed. A new message appeared in my inbox. This time from a journalist whose name I recognized from national headlines. No subject line, no greeting, just a single sentence. "We can publish Sunday at 6:10 a.m. I read it twice, then 3 times. The world was offering me a weapon. The question was, did I dare use it? The days leading up to the wedding blurred into a whirlwind of rehearsals, fittings, and NDAs that stacked higher than the floral samples in my planner's office. Evan had insisted on airtight confidentiality. Every vendor, every stylist, even the valet team signed contracts that bound them tighter than steel. The Palisades estate was more than a venue. It was a fortress, and inside those guarded walls, a guest list was forming that could change the trajectory of my life. I glanced at it one night, the names glinting under the lamplight. Senators, CEOs of companies I had only ever read about in Forbes, actors whose faces once belonged only on billboards, musicians whose songs had carried me through heartbreak. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a statement. For the first time, I would stand not as the shadow of my sister, but as the woman chosen to host a night so rare it would be broadcast into living rooms across the country. Yet beneath the glittering surface, tension coiled. I could feel it each time I caught sight of a relative's social media post, thinly veiled jabs about banquet halls and bad decisions. My parents thought they were in control of the narrative, thought the fake invitations and Lauren's smug displays of wealth had secured their dominance. What they didn't know was that their empire of lies was already crumbling. The unraveling began in a place I least expected. After a long day of final gown fittings, I found myself walking alone to the car. The night air thick with salt from the ocean. A figure stepped out of the shadows. Mr. Harris, my grandfather's longtime attorney. His silver hair caught the moonlight, his posture steady, his leather folder tucked under his arm like it had never left his side. "Rebecca," he paused, then corrected himself softly. "Maddie, I've waited for the right moment." His voice carried both apology and urgency. We sat in a quiet corner of the estate's lounge. He slid the folder across the table, his hands trembling slightly. Inside were documents yellowed at the edges, but pristine where it mattered. My eyes froze on the bold letters of my own name. "This is your grandfather's will," he said, his gaze steady. "It was altered, concealed, and manipulated by your parents, but the original copies survived." I scanned the clauses, my pulse racing with each line. 51% of a company I'd grown up believing was untouchable. His company, the one my father had lorded over us for years as the crown jewel of our family's worth, had been left to me. Not Lauren, not my parents, me. Alongside it was the deed to the lake cabin, the place where I'd once spent summers catching fireflies while my grandfather told me stories about resilience, about carving your own path. My hands shook as I traced my name over and over, as though it might vanish if I blinked. For decades, they had told me I was nothing, a stain, a disgrace. All the while, they had been hiding the truth that my grandfather had seen me, chosen me, trusted me to carry his legacy. Anger and vindication surged together, bitter and sweet. How many years had I been denied this knowledge? How many nights had I cried, believing their narrative that I was worthless, when in fact I had been the rightful heir to the very foundation of their power? Mr. Harris leaned forward. He wanted you to have it, because he knew you'd honor it. He said you were stronger than they ever allowed you to believe. "I'm sorry it's taken this long. I pressed the papers to my chest, my breath ragged. The truth was mine now, irrefutable, undeniable, ready to shatter their control the moment it saw daylight. That's when my phone buzzed. A new message lit the screen, stark and cold in the dim light. From Mom. 3 words. Can we come? The glow of the screen painted my face pale. My chest tightened. After years of scorn, after shredded invitations and whispers of shame, after orchestrating fake cards and bribing my best friend, now, on the eve of everything, they wanted entry. I stared at those words, and for the first time, I didn't feel desperation. I felt power, and I knew the reckoning was only beginning. The night of the wedding shimmered like something out of a dream. The Palisades estate glowed against the cliffside, chandeliers suspended from silk canopies, the Pacific crashing like applause in the distance. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation. Guests in couture gowns and tailored tuxedos mingled with senators, CEOs, and Grammy winners. Cameras rolled for the live broadcast, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a stage. I stood behind the French doors in my gown, veil draped over my shoulders, heart pounding. But the nervousness wasn't about walking down the aisle. It was about what I knew was happening outside the gates. Because they came. My parents and Lauren arrived in a black stretch limousine, the kind reserved for people who believed appearances could buy them a second chance. Paparazzi stationed near the entrance swarmed immediately, their lenses trained on the Carter family, as though they were the guests of honor. But the guards didn't move. The clipboard in the security chief's hand told the truth in cold, black ink. Their names were nowhere to be found. The cameras captured everything. The flash of disbelief across my father's face, the panic in my mother's eyes, Lauren's smile faltering as she tried to pose for photographers. Then came the scene that made the crowd outside gasp. My father, red-faced, gesturing wildly, insisting, "This is my daughter's wedding. We belong." Inside, the guard's voice was calm but firm, carrying straight into the microphones. "If you're not on the list, you're not allowed in." Family or not, within seconds, the humiliation was trending. Clips hit social media faster than champagne could pour. Headlines began forming in real time. Golden family turned away at daughter's wedding. Hashtags exploded, each more brutal than the last. Inside the estate, whispers spread like wildfire. Guests pulled out their phones, watching the live stream of my family begging at the gates. I felt a dozen eyes flick toward me, measuring my reaction. But instead of shrinking, I smiled. A small, deliberate smile. Then came the choice that would haunt or liberate me, depending on who you asked. Evan leaned down and murmured, "You don't have to look." But I looked, and I forwarded the clip. My parents pounding on gates, Lauren shielding her face from cameras, my mother's mascara running, to the producer of the broadcast. "Use this," I typed. "End of night recap." Some would call it cruel. Some would say I went too far. Maybe they were right. But after years of humiliation, after torn invitations, fake cards, and whispers of disgrace, letting the world watch them taste their own medicine felt like justice. The producer's reply was immediate. "Consider it done." The broadcast ended hours later, with footage of Evan and me on the terrace, the Pacific glowing behind us, champagne flutes raised, and then, cut, sharp as a blade, to the Carter family at the gates, pleading, blocked, undone by their own arrogance. The crowd gasped. Donations surged. By morning, the foundation had raised enough to fund 2 years' worth of STEM scholarships for young women, but the true blow landed in silence. As the music swelled and guests toasted, I pulled out my phone. The message from Mom still glowed. "Can we come?" My thumb hovered, my chest heavy with years of rejection and bitterness that had finally hardened into something sharper. I typed 2 words, simple, final. Too late. I hit send. 17 minutes later, it was trending. Screenshots of my reply swept across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Strangers quoted it, turned it into memes, stitched it into videos of the gate confrontation. Number 1 hit nationwide. Guests began murmuring, some with awe, some with unease. A senator raised his glass and said, "To knowing your worth." But I caught the side glance of an actress who whispered, "Harsh." Maybe it was harsh. Maybe it was cold. But, for the first time in my life, the power wasn't theirs. It was mine, and the reckoning wasn't over yet. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to a world that had shifted on its axis. My phone was a storm of notifications, articles, messages, trending hashtags. But one headline cut sharper than the rest. Lauren Cares under federal investigation. At first, I thought it was clickbait. Some tabloid capitalizing on the family drama that had played out on live television. But as I scrolled, the details were undeniable. Financial irregularities, misappropriation of donor funds, lavish purchases charged to accounts meant for scholarships and community programs. The receipts were there. Screenshots, wire transfers, itemized lists of designer handbags, luxury trips, and consulting payments to people who had no business touching charity money. The watchdog journalists didn't stop at the numbers. They interviewed former staff, volunteers who had once believed in Lauren's vision. One broke down in tears on camera, describing how donations intended to fund local after-school programs had disappeared while Lauren flaunted new jewelry at galas. By noon, major sponsors had pulled out. Statements rolled in like thunder. Effective immediately, we are withdrawing support from Lauren Cares until a full audit is completed. My parents scrambled, of course. They called it a misunderstanding, a clerical error, the work of incompetent accountants. But every denial only dug them deeper. By nightfall, the foundation's accounts had been temporarily frozen. The golden glow that had shielded them for decades was gone, replaced by scrutiny and scorn. And then came Mr. Harris. We met again in his quiet office. The leather-bound folder now heavier than ever. He slid the notarized documents toward me. "It's official," he said. "The shares, the properties, they're yours. Your grandfather's wishes are finally recognized." I stared at the papers, the ink shimmering under the desk lamp. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being erased. I wasn't the afterthought. I was the rightful heir. The weight of generations had shifted, and it landed squarely in my hands. There was joy in that moment. Yes, but also a choice. The lake cabin had always been a sanctuary in my memory. Long summers, my grandfather's steady voice telling me I was stronger than they let me believe. The smell of pine and the echo of laughter across the water. It wasn't just a property. It was proof that I had been loved. So I made the choice. With steady hands, I drafted a notice. 14 days. That's how long my parents had to vacate the cabin they had claimed as their own. The cabin my grandfather had meant for me. I hit send, my chest tight with both release and guilt. The backlash was immediate. Some relatives whispered that I was cruel, vindictive, no better than the people I had condemned. Others applauded me, calling it justice long overdue. Even Evan hesitated, his brow furrowed as he read the notice. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. I was, because boundaries aren't always about shutting people out. They're about protecting the parts of yourself that deserve to be whole. The days that followed were a blur of scandal and fallout. Lauren tried to post a teary video blaming disloyal staff, but it only fueled the fire. Neighbors avoided my parents at the grocery store. Former friends turned silent. The pedestal they had placed themselves on crumbled until there was nothing left but the truth they had tried so hard to bury. And through it all, I stayed quiet. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to scream. The world had already seen enough. Justice, I realized, doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes in silence, in signatures, in notices, in the calm certainty that the truth no longer needs your defense. For years, I had begged for scraps of their approval. I had swallowed humiliation, carried rejection like a second skin. But now, standing on the other side of it, I understood something I never had before. Setting boundaries is a form of love. Love for the child I once was, who never got chosen. Love for the woman I had become, who finally chose herself. As the scandal deepened, I felt lighter, not heavier. I wasn't defined by their cruelty anymore. I was defined by the line I had drawn, the boundary that said, enough. So if you've ever been the outsider, ask yourself this: what boundary will you finally draw?